Hey guys, so I come to you with my long-anticipated first installment of my bookshelf tour. I did put out a poll asking you all whether you would prefer a shelf-by-shelf tour or just sort of one long, overview of each shelf in one long video. And I think it was 75% to 25% in favor of shelf-by-shelf, so that's what I'm gonna do. And I promised that I would sort of go a little bit in depth on the books that are on each shelf that I found particularly interesting, but I want to keep these videos from all being obscenely long, so a lot of the books, if I don't have much to say about a book, I will just sort of present it to you and mostly pass it over in silence, but I promise I will talk about some in depth. And also, I'm actually going to do 2 shelves per video. Because that'll keep it a bit more manageable. I count it up, and if I do 2 shelves per video, then I will be able to get this all done in 16 videos. So it's still a lot, but it's manageable. It's not going to be endless. That's my thing. I want this to be, detailed but not endless. I'm not a Steve Donoghue or a Jason Harrigan or a Mark Richardson or a Peggy Krakowski. I don't own, 6,000 books or something. I own maybe 600 to 700, which is still a lot for my age. Anyway, so I'm just gonna get to the first shelf. Alright, so I had a bit of drama because Bessie spilled my glass of water and I had to get a new one. But anyway, so this is the bookcase that we're starting with. This is fiction, so that's primarily what I'm going to be talking about for the first few installments of this tour. We start with Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, which I read a few years ago and rather liked, but and I've been meaning to read more by Achebe for a long time, but just haven't gotten around to it. And we have Daughter of Fortune by Isabel Allende, The Bridge on the Drina by Ivo Andrić. Ivo Andrić is a brilliant Serbo-Croat writer. I won the Nobel Prize way back in the day when winning the Nobel Prize actually was meaningful. If this book is any representation of his literary merits, then it was absolutely deserved, because this was a brilliant sort of sprawling epic novel. Well, not epic in, scope, but epic in the sense that it takes place over the course of many, many, many hundreds of years, all centering around a bridge on the River Drina. It really sticks with me. It's a great piece. If you're interested in, Serbo-Croat literature or the former Yugoslav literature, I would recommend it, although I'm certainly not well read in that area of the world. Next is Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. You all know my relationship with Jane Austen, but if I feel inspired during Jane Austen July, perhaps I will read this. Go Tell It on the Mountain by James Baldwin, which I read a few years ago and really loved. It still sticks with me. The writing is so brilliant. I really need to reread this book and also read more James Baldwin, because the prose style that he had was just unbelievable. But yeah, I really love this. The Noise of Time by Julian Barnes, which I just recently hauled. It's a novel about Dmitri Shostakovich. 3 books by Samuel Beckett. Up next, this is Murphy, his first novel. This is his trilogy, Malloy, Malone Dies, and The Unnameable. This is a challenging trilogy. I really like Malloy, the first book in the trilogy. The second book I was kind of indifferent towards. The third book I hated. And I do, after reading Ulysses, especially really want to reread this trilogy, give it another go, because it is very much sort of in response to and in the tradition of the stream of consciousness sort of style in Ulysses. And also I could see when I read it the first time just how well written it was, so it's one that I do want to give another shot. And finally, we have Watt, which I did not care for. The Best Intentions by Ingmar Bergman. Yes, that is the famed film director Ingmar Bergman, who directed such films as Persona and Cries and Whispers and Wild Strawberries. This is a novel that he wrote about his parents' courtship and marriage, and I'm actually going to be buddy reading this with Jason of Old Blues Chapter and Verse later in the year. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio, a huge classic. I will read eventually. I'm not sure when, but it is kind of huge. Then a book by an author you may all have heard of. It's BookTube's own Britta Bowler. This is her novel, The Decision, a historical novel about Thomas Mann. I would like to read it after I've read some more Thomas Mann, which I hope to do this year, so maybe I will read this towards the end of the year or in 2021. The Savage Detectives by Roberto Bolaño. The Myths of Avalon by Marion Zimmer Bradley, a brilliant feminist reworking of the Arthurian myths from the perspectives of all the female characters. The main character is actually Morgan Le Fay, who in this novel is called Morgane, and it is brilliant. It's awesome. World War Z by Max Brooks. You may all be wondering why on earth I, of all people, have this, of all books, on my shelf. But I occasionally grab books like this, light books like this that are kind of fluffy when I see them at thrift stores and such, because I figure that at some point in my life I will just need to sort of relax and read something easy, you know, if I have something going on, something intense going on. So that's kind of why I grabbed it. I figure it will be good when a time like that comes. Profane Friendship by Harold Broadkey. The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte, the most underrated of the Bronte novels, in my humble opinion. This is my copy of Jane Eyre, the most overrated of the Bronte novels, in my, again, humble opinion. Finally, we have my copy of Wuthering Heights, which I adore. Cathedral by Raymond Carver. 3 Willa Cather novels. This is Death Comes for the Archbishop, My Antonia, and The Song of the Lark, which, as you can see, I have still not finished, but I will finish it before this year is out. Moonglow by Michael Chabon. Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes. This is the Walter Starkey translation, and I found Don Quixote and Sancho Panza to be fascinating characters, but as a reading experience, this book made me want to bang my head against the wall. Next are 2 volumes that were really finds. So this is a Library of America volumes of James Fenimore Cooper. This is The Pioneers, The Last of the Mohegans, and The Prairie. So this is volume 1 of the Leatherstocking Tales. They didn't have volume 2, but what they did have was, this is Sea Tales. So this is The Pilot and the Red Rover. And yeah, I found these at Goodwill, and basically I got them both for like $1.50. And you know, these things usually go for like $40 a piece, so the fact that that I got them for that cheap is pretty crazy. Moll Flanders by Daniel Defoe. Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe. Underworld by Don DeLillo. White Noise by Don DeLillo. Bleak House by my arch nemesis, Charles Dickens. It's a bit presumptuous of me to call Charles Dickens my arch nemesis, but I just read Great Expectations back when I was in high school, and I couldn't stand it, and I just found it really hard to read anything more by Charles Dickens. But the next book here is the one that I think I will start with when I do finally get around to it, and that is David Copperfield, and I'm kind of interested in this one because it's about a writer, and I like stories about writers and artists and such, so I think that this might be a good gateway drug into Dickens, if there is any gateway drug for me into Dickens. Maybe he is just an author I'll never really connect with, like Jane Austen, but maybe not, and maybe this will be a gateway. So we have now progressed into the second shelf, which I promise is not a reference to Britta Bowler's channel, but this is Room by Emma Donoghue. Another thrift store find. I know this was made into a very successful film. I also really have taken a bit more of an interest in Irish writers, and Emma Donoghue is Irish, and also I find the premise of this novel quite intriguing. Now we progress into my little section of Dostoyevsky. So we start with the Brothers Karamazov, which I really need to reread, but was quite an experience to read for the first time. It is really gripping while also being incredibly philosophical and deep. I love it. But the next one I love even more. This is Crime and Punishment. One of my favorite books of all time, definitely. It was in the conversation when I was coming up with my top 10 for the BookTube Top 10s tag. I still remember how I felt when I finished it. It's just an incredible reading experience. It really, what I compared it to after reading it was I compared it to the experience of watching Breaking Bad, because it is just this psychodrama inside of this character's head, as well as being just, again, like the Brothers Karamazov, just incredibly gripping on a plot level as well. So I love this, and this copy means a lot to me. It's not a book I would ever give to anyone because I received it from a friend the last time I saw him before he died. So that's also a copy with a lot of sentimental value attached to it. The Devils by Dostoyevsky, Notes from Underground, which I don't think I liked as much as I should have, and The Idiot. We return to the Victorians with Middlemarch by George Eliot, which I did begin last year and read the first 100 or so pages of, and was liking the writing, but just sort of got consumed by other things. This does qualify for March of the Mammoths, though, so maybe then. We then have my 3 Louise Erdrich novels, so this is Love Medicine, and I read this last year, and actually, it has aged really well in my mind. I think when I first read it, I didn't think it was perfect. I didn't love it, but it really has stuck with me. I do think back to it pretty frequently, especially certain beautiful passages in it. So I think I maybe underestimated it when I finished it for the first time. Then we have The Roundhouse, which I haven't read, and Tracks, which I also have not read yet. These are my 2 Faulkner novels. This is As I Lay Dying, and the second Faulkner novel I have is Go Down, Moses. And these are both Faulkner novels that I've heard are great places to start. So, yeah, hopefully I can get my gateway into Faulkner this year. This is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert, The Meadow by James Galvin, The Broken Wings by Khalil Gibran, The Sorrows of Young Werther by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, Dead Souls by Nikolai Gogol, The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame, Less by Andrew Sean Greer, which I really, really liked and found incredibly touching. I thought it was a well-deserved Pulitzer Prize winner. The Good Soldier Schweik by Yaroslav Hasek. So this is really the, from what I can tell, it is really the quintessential Czech novel of the 20th century, at least. It's about this soldier named Schweik. I believe his first name is Yaroslav, but he's never called by his first name. He's just called Schweik. And he is... so this novel was published not long after the First World War, and the soldier Schweik is, forced to serve in the army. He's Czech, but he's forced to serve in the Austro-Hungarian army, as a lot of Czechs were. And he, rather than, being sort of outright disobedient or being some sort of a conscientious objector, what he does, he has this weird form of subversion where he takes every order he's given so literally that it's basically ends up totally screwing up what the order was supposed to, accomplish. So, for example, his commanding officer tells him to look after the commanding officer's wife for a day, and he says, make sure you do everything she asks you to do to, give her as good a time as possible, and what else would she ask for, but she wants Schweik to have sex with her, and so he has sex with her, and, you're thinking, well, the officer ordered him to do everything she told him, so there you go. But it's just a really interesting perspective on being subversive. I remember reading a memoir by a Czech person where they sort of said that everyone in the Czech Republic, at least in the Czech part of Czechoslovakia, was sort of a mini Schweik during the Soviet and Nazi years, where they weren't in outright rebellion, but they were sort of secretly and quietly being subversive. And anyway, there's a lot of very Czech humor in the novel. I do need to reread it. It's not a page turner by any means, but it is a lot of fun. There is some great social commentary as well. We're going now into a bunch of Thomas Hardy. This is Jude the Obscure, which is one of the most depressing novels I've ever read. The Mayor of Casterbridge, which is a really great psychological portrait of this man who is the protagonist. I thought it was brilliant. The Return of the Native, which I mostly liked, but the ending really, really pissed me off. And Tess of the D'Urbervilles, which made me cry. This is more like a little pamphlet. So this is The Gentle Boy and Other Tales by Nathaniel Hawthorne. The House of the Seven Gables by Nathaniel Hawthorne, a lovely copy. And The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne, which I had to read for school when I was in high school, and I remember really, really liking it, but I really, again, need to reread it, so hopefully, eventually. A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway, which is one of the most moving novels I've ever read. The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway, which is probably still my favorite piece of writing by Ernest Hemingway. And The Snows of Kilimanjaro and Other Stories by Ernest Hemingway. And The Snows of Kilimanjaro would probably easily take the second spot for my favorite Hemingway after The Old Man and the Sea. Next two entries are a bit odd. So these are the last two novels in Frank Herbert's Dune saga, which, if you remember, there was this whole Dune Tube thing that was supposed to happen on a few different channels, and it all kind of came tumbling down. I think, Steve got through book 6, good for Steve, but Mark Richardson just, I think, got overpowered. He was busy and didn't have time to read through all these relatively thick sci-fi novels. And Elena McCreen, I actually think, soldiered through and actually did read the entire series, but I think she is just too busy to make videos, and then I got through God Emperor of Dune, but again, as you could probably tell, did not find the energy to make a video, and also I sort of skipped Children of Dune, so yeah, unfortunately, it sort of fell apart, but I want to read these two before the end of the year, because, just because I'm a completionist, and because they sound really good. And I only have these two because I've actually been getting rid of these copies as I've been reading them, because I want the brand new Ace paperback. Ace Publishing just released like lovely new copies of all 6 of the novels, and I want to get copies of those at some point and have those be my sort of life copies of all of these books. Another Czech novel. This is Closely Watched Trains by Bohumil Hrabal, and this is about a guy who works at a train station in Czechoslovakia while it was being occupied by the Nazis. And he and a couple other people at this train station basically scheme to blow up a train that is bringing supplies to the Nazi forces in World War II. But that really is just sort of a frame story for this really, I think, really perceptive exploration of toxic masculinity. Because this main character, whose name, Milos, this main character, he is 22 years old and just has all these anxieties, which are all connected to his masculinity, to his feeling that he is not masculine enough. He feels super insecure that he's 22 years old and still a virgin, and he also attempts suicide at one point in the novel because he experiences premature ejaculation while he is trying to, perform with his girlfriend. And you just see this exploration of these expectations thrust upon men and the toxic effect that they have on men. And I thought that it was really, really interesting. And then we close out with 2 more books that I hauled the other day. These are the last 2 novels in N.K. Jemisin's Broken Earth trilogy. This is The Obelisk Gate, and this is The Stone Sky. So I will be buddy reading those with Brian over at Bookish, and I am super looking forward to it. So anyway, I'm going to edit this video down quite extensively, so I hope it's not too long, but I hope you all enjoyed. Of course, if there are any books here that I didn't talk about much and you want to discuss them, then please leave a comment, or if you have any thoughts on anything else in the video, then again, leave comments. I always look forward to them. But anyway, we'll return soon for the second installment. So thank you for watching, guys, and I'll talk to you later.